So, this video is going to be about Russia's war in Ukraine, started in February 2022, as we all know. Um, Now, Russia's war in Ukraine, I think, is a very interesting example because, I think my views have evolved on it quite a lot since it started. The war in Ukraine started when I was a senior in high school, and I mean, I still remember, constantly refreshing. Like, this was late February, but even around mid-February, I started to become more aware of the fact that this war was starting, and I really wanted to know. Always refreshing news articles. Oh, has anything happened yet? In my AP Spanish class, because we did not learn very much Spanish in that class because the teacher was speaking English, most of it actually. But yeah, the war in Ukraine. So, like, basic facts of the war. Russia launched what they call a special military operation in Ukraine and had a number of justifications from denazifying Ukraine to stopping the expansion of NATO, which is a far more legitimate thing. And they called Zelensky a Nazi at one point. Real funny stuff like that. But ultimately, Russia's initial goals when they launched this war was to replace Ukraine's government, pretty much. Very similar to what you're seeing America do in Venezuela. Russia just wanted to vassalize, essentially, to turn Ukraine into a pliant neighbor, like Belarus, that they wouldn't have to worry about. They wouldn't have to worry about NATO missiles in this country, things like that. They just didn't. They wanted to take it off the table. What you saw in Russia's invasion of Ukraine was remarkable violence. I mean, ridiculous shit. I still remember Bucha. And I'm not a big details guy when it comes to things like this, but lots of people dead in Bucha. I think I'm not sure if they were mass graves or not, but lots of war crimes. It's a ridiculous war. Um, that being said, we should look not just at the country's aims, but also at the response of that country, at the defense, right? So Russia attacks Ukraine. Russia wants to take over Ukraine's government. Ukraine, oh, we actually want sovereignty, so no thank you. Ukraine wants to defend itself, of course. So Ukraine can't defend itself on its own. Ukraine is not Russia. Ukraine is a fairly large country. I think they have 40 million or so people. But Ukraine isn't Russia. And so what Ukraine needs is allies. Ukraine needs allies, period. Ukraine cannot fight this war alone. Luckily for Ukraine, for years at this point, America had been selling them weapons and supporting their military. I'm not sure if they were like joint operations or joint trainings and joint exercises and things like that, but we had made it very clear, we're gonna put some dollars into this because we because we don't like Russia. And then Europe as well. There's also supporting Ukraine initially, and to this day as well. And Europe, for similar, well, Europe's reasons for supporting Ukraine are a little bit different than America's. So Europe wants to support Ukraine because these European countries are, they don't want to be neighbors with Russia either. It's actually kind of like a similar dynamic between what Russia wants in supporting or in invading Ukraine and what Europe wants in supporting Ukraine. Europe wants a Western aligned nation on Russia's border, so that if Russia were to try to expand, these European countries would not have to fight those battles in their own countries. And then Russia wants a non-NATO aligned country on its border, so that as NATO expands, they don't have to fight the battles on their own. It's the same thing, right? Whereas America's primary reason for supporting Ukraine is to weaken the Russian military, because the aid that we give to Ukraine is going to go and kill Russians and blow up their military equipment. Which, if we wanted to if we blew up their military equipment directly, that would start World War III. But if we give weapons to Ukraine and then Ukraine blows it up, oh my God, look, isn't that so great? So, I mean, yeah, that's like the basic look of what the dynamics that are at play, like the major dynamics at least, right? And what I think is really interesting is to look at how those have developed over time. So one of the things complicating Europe's relationship with Ukraine, or Europe's defense of Ukraine, is that Europe gets a lot of natural gas and oil from Russia. Europe is dependent on natural gas and oil because Europe doesn't take climate change seriously. But that's another point. But this war in Ukraine has been very costly for them because they've had to deal with high energy prices in winters. And they've had to really put in lots of work to outmaneuver this new conflict. It's been very difficult for Europe. For the United States, on the other hand, we don't even care. We don't care. It's just we have to throw money at a problem and la 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 la, close our eyes, and it doesn't matter. However, things are not the same. So one of the things that really impacts how this conflict is developed is that what you saw in the beginning of the war in Ukraine was Russia with these maximalist aims, and you saw Russia not be able to achieve them. Russia couldn't take Kyiv. Russia couldn't replace the leadership structure. So instead, they relied on the breakaway provinces, Donetsk and Luhansk, in the east of Ukraine, and that would just be their they'll put their flag down there and kind of settle for that. And that's really what you've seen of the conflict for the last, I'm not sure how many years, but the battle lines really aren't moving all that much. And so instead of seeing the battle lines moving now, instead of seeing either side really advance their aims, now what you're seeing is the real outcome of war, which is all the fucking dead people. So not just Russians, but also Ukrainians are just dying constantly. Battle lines, battle lines, battle lines. Now, when it comes to this tactic, this strategy of just killing your citizens for the sake of war, Russia's much better at it than Ukraine because Russia is much more willing to sacrifice these vulnerable, rudderless, I would say, young men with no other prospects than Ukraine is. And not to mention the fact that a lot of these Ukrainian people have escaped. They're getting the fuck out because they don't want to go to war. Which brings me to to today, right? When you look at Russia and Ukraine now, Ukraine's fucked. Ukraine cannot win the war. And even in fighting the war, Ukraine is fucked. Ukraine is fucked because Ukraine is taking on all of these loans, all of these entanglements with Western countries and all of these weapons that they've received, all of this aid. This is not going to just be something that disappears. They're going to have to deal with the implications of this military conflict far into the future. And so, no, you're good, bro. You can sit there if you want. They're gonna have to keep dealing with this in the future, and ultimately, their country is being destabilized by it. So, all of these dead people are. I mean, that just feeds into the strategy that I mentioned in the last video. That when it comes to war, you're making you're putting your foot down and saying, I'm going to kill people for these goals. Now, Russia is not only more willing to kill people for their goals, they also have more people to kill. Ukrainians are less willing to kill their own people or die for these goals, and they also have less people to die. The math doesn't work. Now, why does the United States still support Ukraine? Well, for the same reason mentioned earlier, weakening the Russian military is a very important goal of the United States. But ultimately, that comes at the expense of Ukrainians. That is to say, the point of this video in talking about this conflict is not, some sort of a deep analysis of everything going on in Russia and Ukraine and an understanding of the exact geopolitical blah, blah, blah. But it's really a broader sort of ideological analysis of, well, not ideological. It's more of an analysis of what the real outcomes are for people. Because I think people really aren't centered in these sorts of conversations a lot. You see a lot of people, a lot of the NATO types, they'll go, oh, well, we've got to defend against Russia, blah, blah, blah. But who has got to defend against Russia? Because you're still alive, so it doesn't seem like you're doing much in that regard. But ultimately, I mean, the point of this video is that Ukraine is worse off now. And so I would say, at the time in 2022, I probably would have, I did say, we should defend Ukraine, yada, yada. But looking back on it now, I think an important thing to consider is not just whether or not a country is righteous in their action, but also the death that is going to come from certain conflicts. And obviously, every conflict is not able to just be brushed aside and say, well, it's a shame, but this is just what's happening. The way that I would say this conflict probably should have been treated in hindsight, or at least, my full take on what should have happened is that America should have used the early days of the war and pushed as aggressively as possible for negotiations in order to bring a peaceful settlement, as opposed to supporting militarily for so long with so many people dying. But yeah, my point is to say every conflict can't be this sort of, there's not so much we can do, but there are many conflicts that are. And if you care about people staying alive, then it's very important that we do not reflexively support, defense and defending our allies and things like that, just because, we'd like to. Because at the end of the day, war is horrible. It's horrible. It's evil. And it murders quite a lot of people. And no matter what side you're on, that's going to be the case. So there are more considerations than just, righteousness. That being said, I do hope the people of Ukraine are able to forge a future for themselves, free not only of Russian interference in forms that they've seen over the last 4 years and really going back since they gained their independence, but I hope that they also are not going to become instruments of Western interests, Western capital, Western militarism, because neither of those futures respect the dignity of humanity and the dignity of Ukrainian people.